Hi, Paul Thompson here from Spitfire Audio. I'm very excited today to be able to show you the first of our Abbey Road Orchestra strings releases. This is the first Violins. It's a package in which we've got tiering, which we've now introduced. So you've got a core package and a pro package. It's where the Orchestral Foundations library is a sketchpad. This is the absolute most detailed tool. In fact, it's the most detailed library we've ever made. I can give you some stats. 3 days of mixing, over 60 hours of session time, over 2,000 hours of programming time, and just under 200,000 individual sample recordings. We developed a whole range of new techniques for capturing samples, including the short notes, but also the legato transitions, and the way that we recorded legato sounds is different and much more detailed here. It's incredibly inspiring to play, an amazing sound of the players in that incredible room, captured by Simon Rhodes, an amazing sound recordist. So let's start with the Performance Legato Extended articulation. I'm just going to play first, and then I'm going to start to explain a few of the different features that there are in this patch. So the first thing to notice is that with these two controllers here, I'm controlling the amount of vibrato, which goes in a nice smooth flow, and also the dynamic. So you've got a really lovely smooth crossfade between those 5 different levels of dynamic performance. Now you'll have noticed that I'm also varying the attack of each note. Now if you play softly on the keyboard, you get a really beautiful soft entrance to the note. If you play within the medium velocity range, a standard attack, and if you play hard, you get a marcato attack to the note. So a lot of different performance style in terms of how you introduce each phrase. Very, very useful there. Now, what's happening in the legato as we move from one note to the next? Well, there's a lot of new technology and new techniques that we've used, which we've done a huge amount of experimentation in the studio at Abbey Road. And we've come up with some different ways of recording our legato. So the first thing is, what are the 3 basic things that you usually get in a legato patch? Well, you've got a portamento, so there I'm playing the second note very softly, and that triggers the full portamento. If I play the second note in the middle of the velocity range, then I get a standard fingered transition. If I play harder with the velocity range, then I get a bowed transition between the notes. So the bow change happens on the note where you play harder on the keyboard. Now, there are a few things in there that are also going on, and specifically with the portamento. And these are tweaks that are very, very easy to make once you've played your MIDI in, or if you draw in your MIDI, it's super simple. But from 0 to 10, you get the very strong full range of the portamento. So the portamento triggers at velocities up to 20, but when you get over 10, it progressively becomes less portamento. It becomes slightly tighter and quicker and less kind of swoopy. So you've got the ability, after you've played in your performance, to go back in and tighten up any of those portamento transitions that you feel are a little bit too exaggerated. So what else is going on under the hood in this patch? Well, we have a new type of legato which is based on an arpeggiated style of playing. And that's actually performed exactly in that way, so that when you start to play those kind of figures, it switches to that style, that type of transition, and you're getting a much more accurate and responsive playing experience. The sound, it sounds more like you would expect the violins to sound doing that kind of figure. This also extends to doing runs. And so anything which is fast and up to a minor third will trigger another kind of transition which is designed from runs and to sound like part of a run. All of this happens without you having to think about it. It sounds complicated when I'm explaining it, but really all you need to do is just play and everything kind of happens in a very musical manner. Now you can also play staccato with this patch. So there's huge amounts of control without touching the controllers up there, simply from the way that you're playing from the keyboard. Now, in terms of the additional controls over the patch, you'll see that when we click on the button here, we open up these controls. We've got our vibrato, which we were looking at before. There's a reverb built in, which is defaults to 0. You've got your tightness control, the release control, and legato offset. Now this performance patch is designed with as short a legato offset as possible, so it's very responsive to play. You can dial that down to get more of the sound of the transition, but we'll move on to a patch shortly that is designed specifically to get those beautiful long lyrical flowing lines. The other controls here are a release going upwards, so we have a longer release available, so you can go into here and dial it right up. And that gives you the longest possible release time. We've got 4 stages of release here. So if we go to the second stage, you can hear that that's started to tighten up, and it's not just the decay of the studio that you're hearing, but also the way that the transitions, the legato intervals are working as well. Everything tightens up slightly. And if we go to this setting where it's at the absolute tightest and driest it would be, and you can hear there it's very tight, and you've got a little bit of the sound of the room, but pretty much all of that natural decay in the room has been shrunk down. Now my preferred option is the kind of third level. And I think that gives you the best balance of clarity of the sound of the instruments and the beautiful sound of Studio One at Abbey Road as well. So let's look at the lyrical legato. Now here we are focusing on, as you can see, if I go to legato offset, we're about halfway in the range, so that's around about 150 milliseconds, and the range on this patch is about from 100 milliseconds to 200, but check the manual to get all the exact figures. And that gives you, it's programmed slightly differently as well, so you get a more of a focus on these kind of flowing lines. I'll give you a demo. So as you can hear, it's still quite responsive, but it does give you that extra little bit of the transition sound within the legato. And if we pull that right to the bottom, so you're getting the maximum sound, it does start to feel a little bit more laggy. But that option is there for people who want to really hear the bow change or the finger change. There are certain things that happen just before the new note starts, and this gives you access to all of that sound as well. So let's look at the long's extended articulation. That gives you access to the 3 different note starts. So the very slow and gentle start, the standard start, and the much harder, intense marcato start. Now, the beauty of this patch is that you can access all of that stuff across the keyboard as you're playing. So let's say if I was playing a 3-part chord, or I could play that with a very slow start, but still feather in those hard marcato attacks. So that's all accessible there from the keyboard. But what I really love about this is the amazing amount of power and control that you have over the dynamic and vibrato, which is, you know, we should always think about these things as musical instruments. You have to play it as if it's a musical instrument, and control over your dynamic in the middle of a note and the vibrato in the note is absolutely part of making it sound musical. And when you get right up there and you've got those different levels of vibrato as well, when you use the molto vibrato, super powerful up high, especially with those marcato attacks. The sound that you associate with all of those kind of incredible, intense, emotional moments in film. Flautando is an old favourite in Spitfire libraries. This is no exception. It's a really beautiful sound. Such a beautiful sound, and it's produced with a faster bow, playing very, very delicately in that kind of floating sound, that kind of flute-like sound that you get. Let's look at the different options for short notes, and this has got some really great variety in. So first up, the spiccatissimo, as short as possible. Now, across the whole library, if you look at the short notes, you have the tightness control here, which is set to the absolute center point for a good balance between, you know, playability, reactiveness, and the sound, because you really need the build-up of sound as the note starts. It kind of grows to a peak, even these very short notes. But you have a range on either side. So you can go from this. You can dial that right up so that you're cutting harder into the note, which can be a creative decision as well as just a, you know, responsiveness, a playing decision. But also you can go and give as much build up as possible on the patch. I think you can hear there's a very, very big difference between those extremes, which gives you a lot of flexibility in designing the sound that you want for all of these short notes. And to demonstrate that alternatively with the staccato, as tight as possible, or as long an attack as possible. So you can hear there's a big difference creatively between those, but the beauty of this library is that everything has been absolutely accurately timed across the whole of all of the short patches in the library. And when you have the control in the default 50% position, then your offset for, you know, moving a track back would be 60 milliseconds, and at either extreme it's 40 milliseconds or 80 milliseconds. So you've got a very consistent range there, and you also know exactly what you need to do if you are putting in offsets into your tracks so that you can play to the click and then get those notes happening exactly on the click. So let's just quickly listen through the 4 different lengths of these short notes. This marcato has an interesting extra feature as well, which is the ability to release the note and to stop the marcato before the end of the performed marcato in the actual sample. And if I demonstrate that, you can hear that we're getting that release happening as you finish the note. Now, that also has different levels of control here. So if we dial up the release control setting, then you can see we're getting a longer performance even when I let go. And if you want the full recorded length, you just hold the notes down. But if we dial that right down to the bottom, and again, I can still hold the note down, but that tightens up. It makes the release quicker and also slightly tighter and drier as well. Again, the default setting is the one that I tend to leave it on, but you've got that control if you want to have a slightly different way of performing. Next up is the tremolo. And again, you've got that full dynamic range there, really, really useful. But it can be. Or. You know, you've got beautiful range of expression from very, very aggressive to really gentle and scattery. You've got these beautiful harmonics. Which again have dynamic control. Pizzicato, going back to short, we've got again the same controls over your attack, your tightness control. But here we have 6 dynamics. So you've got the 5 dynamics of the normal pizzicato, and then you've got the top dynamic, which is the snap, the Bartok pizz, sometimes known as. Really nice, really crisp and tight, but still feeling very human and cheeky. So that's a lot of fun to play. Con Legno battuto, which is Italian for with the wood of the bow. And these are really useful for those kind of ticking clock things. And you can get a great dynamic variety across that as well. Going into our trill section. So we've got 4 different trills. All with these full dynamic control. I do love the... using these to get the kind of equivalent sound of maybe holding a chord and then just doing a normal trem, but because it's effectively a fingered trem, you're getting a different kind of texture there. The minor thirds are very, very useful as well. And then, of course, major thirds. So don't just think about these as just a trill. We don't use trills that often when we're writing, but these are really, really great creative tools for bringing in a beautiful texture, and you've got all kinds of different things going on. It's that kind of I like to think of it as a kind of filigree, or that kind of decorative thing that you can introduce to make things sound interesting, especially when other parts of the string section maybe aren't doing the trill, and you've just got one part that's doing these kind of interesting chordal things. So measured trems. Now these are recorded at 2 different speeds, so I'll show you what those are like. 150 and 180. But you also have a control over here where you can sync to tempo and lock those speeds to the current tempo of your project. In this case, it's 120. And the performance of the 180 being stretched down. Now it's interesting, you can hear there's a different texture there. So picking these is not necessarily just a case of looking at the tempo that you're going to be working at and going for the one that's closest. The sound quality of them being stretched is so good that you can actually use it as a kind of creative tool as well. But I would often do these kind of scattery parts. It always makes me think of John Williams, but it's a measured trem on a moving part where you have maybe 2 notes to each pitch. Or, the difference between that and the 150. And these are the kind of things that really, I'm playing them at 120, but it would be the kind of thing that you'd use maybe at kind of, 140 to 160. If I put in 144, then you can hear it starts to sound more like. That kind of thing, and even faster, going up to 170. And obviously it's kind of hard to play in, but it's the kind of thing that you would just play in, tighten up, and it would sound fabulous. And the difference there, again, between using the 150 and the 180, if we switch to the 180, you get the idea. Very, very useful, and you can play them out. And you get, again, a very useful repeating sound that you can lock into your tempo. So let's look at the legato section of the articulation browser next. And we've got each of these usefully broken out into individual articulations here. They can be key switched, but there's a huge amount of ways that you can control these. Lots of control over the way that you set this up so that it works exactly as you like, to use your sample libraries. So starting with Legato Runs, and this will play anything up to a minor third. If you play over a minor third, that's not what this is designed for. So you won't get a transition sounding, but this is designed for those. So as you can see, very, very agile. It's got exactly that kind of sound that you get when the lovely kind of blur that happens when the players all play a run. And you've got a control of the starting note of the run, which gives you either a standard starting note or a more kind of impulsive, slightly fierier start. Or you can just go. So everything is, again, tailored to the kind of musicality and the specific kind of performances that we usually hear or usually request with these kind of articulations. Next up, Legato Detachè is a bow change legato, and again, it has a lovely, crisp, strong attack. So very, very nice, strong, fast bow, nice and intense. I mean, obviously, if you can play it quieter. Or very quiet. And you can hear there the multiple levels of legato transition, multiple dynamic layers that are within the patch. Really gives you a huge amount of variety and control over the over the dynamic that you're performing with. We've got the Portamento next up. Again, with lots and lots of control there over the dynamic. The normal slurred legato, we call this, is just a straightforward fingered transition. So the bow continues and the fingers make the new note. And again, full control within the range of dynamics. We have what we call our Allegro legato, which is for playing intervals of up to a sixth, particularly where it sounds in its kind of sweet spot, and it's for doing these kind of arpeggiated figures. And that you're getting that kind of, it's where the part is moving slightly faster, and it's a different recording of the way that one note changes to another to give you maximum control and musicality there. The standard long, the non-extended longs patch, which is without the different attacks. If you prefer playing without those attack options, maybe you're playing with a slightly less detailed keyboard in terms of the velocity control, it's very straightforward to just use that one, and you don't get this accidental attacks playing when you don't want them to. So the performance legato, a nice, agile, very simple, straightforward legato to play with just a fingered transition, but sounds so beautifully musical. Very playable and very easy to use if you don't want to break out into all of the independent types of legato. And also the lyrical legato here has a different style of programming, but also if we look at the legato offset between these two patches, the performance legato is dialed right up, so you've got the fastest transition in the library, whereas the lyrical legato has this slightly slower transition. Again, you can control that, you can tighten it up or loosen it, but let's play the programming here more suited to these kind of slower lyrical lines. And if we really wanted to get the maximum amount of the sound of those transitions, then we can bring that right down here, which is, I believe it's about 200 milliseconds, but again, all these numbers are in the manual. It's fabulous. It really adds something, having just that little bit of extra sound, just the tiny changes that the player makes as they're about to change note, and you really get those coming through when you take the maximum amount of legato offset, and within that you also have that different style of programming that takes you into that kind of more lyrical flowing sound. But we can tighten this up. It is slightly more laggy to play, so you could play it in tighter and then move the notes back and loosen it up, and that sounds like this when you're playing. Still absolutely fabulous, really musical, but slightly easier to play if you're struggling with the lag, with the dial turned all the way down. So let's go back to our Spiccatissimo. I'm going to show you some of the different signal options in the library. And we're going to use the Spiccatissimo because it's the shortest sound and gives you the best idea of spatialization. But we'll also look at a couple of these with the legato sound as well, so that you can get a feel for how the sound field changes when you're hearing a melody. So the first signal up is mix 1. That's the standard one we've been listening to so far. And this, if you hover over the name of the signal, you'll get an explanation in the bottom left-hand corner that shows you that this is Simon's mix and what it's made from. Tree 1, which is the kind of more standard, more omnidirectional tree. Now, if we go to mix 2 is built from tree 2, which has a more directional mic selection. So let's load that up and you can hear the difference. You've got a couple of different options for the close mics. Now, these are small diaphragm condensers over the section, and this gives you a very directional, standard close sound, the kind of thing that you, if you were working mainly from the tree sound, the Decca tree, you would dial in a bit of this close if you wanted some of that crispness and some of the more, the brighter, slightly closer sound to the players. So the ribbons, as an alternative, have a much more rounded top end, so you get a more mellow sound from them. But it's still, the position is the same, they're still over the section and panned correctly to sit right there. Now we have our pop mic sounds in the Abbey Road Orchestra. Those are not related to the position of the orchestra in the room. They are much more focused on giving you a wide stereo image right in front of you that you can then do whatever you want to. You can pan it wherever you want. But it's got a more intense and full pop sound to it. So this is a stereo, cardioid stereo valve mic. As you can see there, you hover above the name of the mics, you get that explanation. So this sounds like this. And that has its own corresponding room sound. Again, these are designed to work together. And you can hear that the room sound as well from the pop signal is focused right down the middle, nice wide sound, giving you maximum control there over what you do with that sound afterwards. Tree 1, these classic vintage Omni mics. That's the standard sound. It's the absolute default for orchestral recording and, of course, for film score recording. We have Tree 2, which gives us an alternative, and these are more directional. It's a Decca tree still, but the mics are not omnis, so you get a tighter sound. And that focus is much more in on the instruments in a way. They're still in the correct place. They're still sitting where they would sit, but it gives you less of that kind of overall width and roominess to the sound. Then we have the outriggers, which are matched to the trees. And if you remember, the tree sits above where the conductor stands, but then the outriggers are on the same vertical plane, but further out and give you that extra width. And many engineers just use those and mix them into the tree sound as part of the tree sound. It just gives you that extra kind of nice spatialization, but sounding like this on their own. And following Tree 2's more directional sound, these outriggers too use a more directional mic as well. Now, the interesting thing about that is that these outriggers have the effect of pulling the sound field in slightly. So you could match in a different way. You could match Tree 2, which has the tighter, more focused sound, with outriggers 1, which have the wider sound, and get this kind of sound. Which gives you, in some ways, the best of both worlds. You've got the focus of Tree 2, but you've got that slightly bigger, further field that Outriggers 1 gives you. The mids are the valve red mics, the new Abbey Road mics, placed between the conductor and the source. So they're slightly closer out towards the instruments. And the advantage of that is that it brings that section forward slightly. It's quite often used, featured when you want a section having a melody or some kind of significant part that needs to sing out slightly over everything else. But you don't want to go quite as close as using the close mics. The mid mics are a perfect solution to that. So the ambient mics are the omni mics that are, you know, the right at the rear of the room, give you the most ambient sound and can be blended into any of the other mics to give, you know, a little bit more feeling of room and reverb and that kind of thing. Now, of course, being Abbey Road with that fabulous mic collection, we have to use the vintage mics. So the first signal chain uses a pair of these 1940s ribbon mics, the RM1Bs, placed in the conductor position, and those sound like this. Just incredible to think those mics are 80 years old. It's got that colour, it's got the character, but it also still sounds beautifully crisp. And the alternative to that, the vintage 2-chain, has the 44BX ribbons, and that sounds slightly older. But still a really fabulous sound. Now, we've got a section leader mic, a very, very directional mic focused just on the leader of the violins. And incredibly, I don't know how Simon managed to do this, but incredibly close and focused. And we'll come back and listen to that in a second with the legato so you can hear that playing a melody. Finally, last but not least, the spill mics. So the rest of the orchestra mics are collected into one really useful signal. And as you can hear, you already get a really amazing feel of the sound stage of the rest of the studio. And those can be incredibly useful as well. And I tend to never, you know, it's very rare that I've got more than 2 signals going at once, occasionally 3. This isn't a case of like bung loads and loads of signals up. That's not really the best use for it. And you end up with something that really isn't focused. The thing that you need to do is to imagine in your head how you want the sound to be, and then to use those, the mics that most closely get you there. And I know that Andy Blaney, for example, uses the outriggers and the ambient mics. That's his kind of favourite sound for many libraries. And sometimes you don't want the tree because you want the absolute widest possible sound, and losing the tree sometimes gets you that extra wide sound. So there's lots and lots of different options here. But remember, the more mics you put up, the less focus you get. So the reason for all of these mic options and all these signal chain options is not to use loads of them. It's to be able to find something very, very unique within the sound world and focus in on that. So I'm going back to the section leader and then back to performance legato extended, and just check this out. So interesting. You can hear the rest of the section just in the background, but you're so focused in on that one single player, that leader. This is incredibly useful. It's really about dialing up a single, you know, sometimes a performance instruction would be to get the leader to play out over everybody else. And this is a perfect way of getting that sound. Let's go back to the mids, and I can show you that the effect of having those mid mics pulling the sound closer. So if we listen to that first. And just by comparison, we go back to the tree. So you see it's sitting where you would expect it to sit within the orchestra, but when you switch to the mid mics, just having that extra bit of proximity, just moving slightly closer to the section, doesn't disturb the stereo field, but it does lift that sound and it makes that slightly sing out over everything else. And for my selection of outriggers, one for that super wide sound just on its own. And my own personal favourite is having the outriggers and the mids together. Just drop right down to non-vib there at the end. And I really love that sound, and it just gives me all of my favourite stuff that I hear in modern or classical recordings as well, but modern kind of film score recordings. It's getting the width of sound, almost a kind of slightly over hyper real sound, but then having the mids in there to kind of pull the sections towards you and give you that real intensity. Really lovely close sound there. And then just comparison with the pop mains. To get you that nice centralized sound, which gives you then the control, if we add in the pop room, it gives you the control to direct that exactly where you want. If you're doing a production where you don't want the standard seating, everything is focused right down the barrel here. Maximum control, a nice vibrant full sound. So that's an overview of everything that's in the Abbey Road Orchestra First Violins library. The first of our string libraries. Next up is cellos. It's the most detailed string library we've ever made. Lots and lots of new recording techniques and technology under the hood to make it as simple as possible to get your musical ideas out and onto your sequencer. I hope you're going to have a lot of fun playing with this. I certainly am. It's very, very inspiring to play. And there's a huge amount of detail and control that you can have over your performance. Look forward to seeing you on the next one. Bye-bye.